Rickie with a call to men. And as I was listening to, especially the DA Billy West talking about, when we think about labor trafficking, and Nikki talking about demand, how culture impacts demand. And it took me back to, and I shared with the group last night, my CEO, Tony Porter, who has a great TED Talk. Go to our website and you can see it. But we were at a sexual assault conference, and Tony said if women could have ended the violence, they would have done so already. If women could have ended the violence, they would have done so already. It's going to take us as men, seeing our role in ending the violence. So when we think about human trafficking, and we, as DA Billy West just said, when we think about human trafficking and we see those numbers, but when we think about sex trafficking, who are mainly the victims? Women and girls, right? Who are mainly the traffickers and the buyers? They are men. And so what is our role as men in engaging other men to really impact culture? Because we, the people, we set the culture. We set the culture. So what is our role to impact culture? So how culture impacts the man. So when we think about human trafficking, when we look at the numbers, 80% of men never purchase sex. But look at those 20% who do. That's 27 million that purchase sex. And so when we think about it, and I think as the DA just shared, it's a multi-billion-dollar industry. Multi-billion-dollar industry. And so and then we think about the average age of a girl who's trafficked, that's 14 years old. 14 years old when we think about the average age of a girl who's trafficked. And so when we think about who is buying sex, that's why it's so important in our role as men to engage men. So where does it really begin at? So we have to think about something we talk about at a call to men, what we call the man box. And I'll talk about that in the breakout section. But really what the man box really talk about, there are three tenets when we think about the collective socialization of manhood, how we're socialized to be men, when it starts when we're little boys. When we think about it is, we're taught to view women as less value. We're taught to view women as less value. And the way I'll show that to you is when we think about little boys and they're playing sports, how do we tell a boy to run faster or to jump higher? We tell him he's running like a what? So we're telling him at a very early age that girls are less valued than boys. And so we have to begin to change those messages. Think about the words that we use. Oftentimes I work with even high school football coaches. You know, I'm blessed to work with professional athletes, but oftentimes I'm working with coaches and say, think about the language you use with your athletes. What are the messages that you're sending? So when we think about this, look at the culture that you're setting, teaching them at a very early age that girls have less value than boys. And so when we think about these is part of the root causes when we think about demand or violence against women and girls. The next thing is that we're also taught to view women as property, that women are the property of men. Think about the last time you went to a wedding. A lot of ministers are changing that. Now, I know I changed it. But when we say, who gives this woman to be married to this man? It's almost like the transference of property. And so we're taught as men, when we think about culture, to treat women as property. And so when we think of this, then we don't see their humanity. And so this is another thing that helps create that culture, Also, the last thing is objects, and mainly sexual objects. When we think about the objectification, look at a lot of the commercials that we watch on TV when women are viewed as sexual objects. I think about beer commercials. I think about tool commercials back in the day. I was sharing the group last night. I think Cheez-Its, now one of my favorite crackers I love to eat. Now they've kind of sexualized the Cheez-It commercial almost. So we think about objectification. So all those things really equals men's violence against women and girls. And then when we think about value too, I was sharing with the group last night, is that take 3 teenage boys and they're walking down the street. I think Elisa was sharing about one of the videos, she had on the video, was this young lady talked about who were being street called by boys. But let's take a scenario, 3 boys, teenage boys, and they see this pretty girl, and 2 of them, begin to street call her and making different remarks. And one doesn't. What did the other 2 boys say to the one who don't? What's wrong with you? You don't like girls? Now, all of a sudden maybe it's that he respects women. Maybe he respects girls. But now, in that culture we're trying to make him feel bad to really join in what the other 2 boys do. But now take those same 3 boys, and another girl is walking down the street, but now these 3 boys are baseball players. They play for the high school baseball team. But this young lady who's walking down the street, this is the head coach's daughter. Now, all of a sudden, how do you think they'll treat her when they see her? With respect. Why would they treat her with respect? Because it's the coach's daughter. So now her value is based on the man that she's attached to. Based on the man that she's attached to. Within my work, I was in a city where my daughter lives, Major League Soccer, spring training. And I asked the players, I said, if you met my daughter today, would you respect her? They're like, yes, Mr. Houston, we would. I said, how could you know her? I don't have a picture up on the screen of my daughter. So in order for that to happen, you have to respect all women and girls that you come in contact with. And so when we think about this whole less value, those three tenets, think about less value, property, objectification, mainly sexual objectification, that equals men's violence against women, which also equals to demand. Also equals demand. This is why we have to begin to have these conversations at a very early age. And when we look at that is, that collective socialization of manhood, that's the foundation of violence. Now, when you look at those things on the screen, this pyramid, this is this isn't no hierarchy or order or anything. But what we do know is if we destroy that foundation, deconstruct that foundation, then that's how we eradicate all forms of violence against women and girls. One of the things, and John is going to talk about it later today, talked about it last night, is when I go back to my top right-hand corner, when we think about porn, the impact on porn on culture. What's the average age boys begin to watch porn? Average age, average age is 11. Thank you so much. So average age is 11. That means they may start watching as early as what? 5 or 6 years old. At what age do we give kids cell phones now? We give them a tool at a very early age where they have access to porn. So when we think about kids beginning to watch porn at a very, very early age, that's culture. We begin to set a culture because if no one have a conversation with that kid at 11 years old, the porn he's watching at 16 is not the same porn he was watching at 11 because we know porn has a very stimulating factor that he's going to watch more and more porn. And so in the workshop, we're going to talk about media influences as well. But something else that's taking place right now is what we call the manosphere. The manosphere. And what it is, young boys now, the number one question asked is, what is a man? And so they're learning from the internet, mainly YouTube, with the manosphere out there, teaching negative things about how to be a man that really, really impacts women and girls. So we'll talk a little bit about the manosphere as well. We'll also talk about other media influences, some of the music, some of the movies that we're watching as well. We'll see that also. And we'll also define what is the manosphere. We'll talk about some of those images and some of those resources out there around the manosphere. But we'll also, in our session, we'll give the antidote because at a Call to Men, we have a curriculum for boys, for middle and high school boys called Live Respect, teaching about health and respect for manhood. Because we know that the more we talk about what health and respect for manhood is, that's how we change culture. That's how we change culture because we have to teach boys. Because when we think about men's violence against women and girls, it's learned behavior. And those things that are learned can be unlearned. Let me say that again. Those things that are learned can be unlearned. So we got to have conversation with kids at a very early age. John was sharing last night, and we were talking before last night, is that it's so hard to get curriculums in school now. When we talk about porn prevention, when we talk about violence prevention as well. But in our Live Respect curriculum, we launched it back in 2016, and we did a pre and post test with the curriculum with 300 boys from middle and high school boys from around the country. And 81% of those boys, and this different demographics, some public schools, some private schools, some charter schools, different demographics around the country, but 81% of those boys admitted not knowing what consent was. Now, through the curriculum, we were able to flip those numbers around, but think about 81% did not know what consent meant. So when we have that, when we think about culture, where do these boys go when they leave high school? Where do they go? Talk to me. Do we have a problem with sexual assault in colleges? 1 in 5 girls between the age 16 and 24 when we think about sexual assault. All right, where else do they go? If not college. Military, thank you so much. Do we have a problem with sexual assault in the military? I think the DA talked about, military bases where trafficking is so, is so heavy around military bases. So yes, we have a problem in the military as well, in general society. That's why it's so important that we have these prevention curriculum, not only curriculum, but sessions like, and thank you for putting this conference on, but it's so important to have sessions like we're having today so that we bring awareness around these issues, but not only awareness, but begin to put things in place. So it's my role is that how do we engage men? How do we engage men of influence? When I work with professional athletes, I tell them you have influence because you're a professional athlete. And what you choose to talk about is a platform. I'm standing on a platform, and so there's something that's raised. And so those things we begin to raise are your platform. And so what if we can get men of influence to talk about platform? It's great to have a DA who's on top of human trafficking because now it becomes important to other law enforcement in their counties. Then he can lead the way for other DAs to make it important in their county. So when we have influence, like this church here, proud of the pastor here who's standing against human trafficking, but now he can engage other pastors using that influence. So we need men of influence, whether it's professional sports, whether it's law enforcement, whether it's in your community. You can be a gatekeeper in your community, but we have to begin to engage other men and engage other boys around ending human trafficking. And so I'll stop here, and if you come by my workshop, we'll take a deeper dive. Thank you so much.